Hi, this is Debbie. I've recently had some great fun with the December 2014 card kit from Simon Says Stamp. And one of the cards which has gone down particularly well and I've had some lovely feedback for, which I really want to thank you. It means so much when you get some positive feedback from people, is this iris effect card, which has got cardstock strips around the outside edge of a die cut circle. And I've had lots of requests as to how to do that for a video so that you can see. So today I've got my supplies. I've got lots of strips of the cardstock from the kit, along with some of the paper vellum, a 4-bar, that's roughly 3.5 by 5 inch top folding card base in the surf blue colour, and a panel 3.25 by 4.75 of the £120 white cardstock from the kit. I've recently received these stitch circles from Simon Says Stamp and I love them. Around the cutting edge you have some stitching both on the inside and the outside of the cutting edge, which leaves a really nice accent to your cards. I have the £120 white panel and I'm going to keep that die cut in place with a little washi, and then I'm going to run it through my Cuttlebug. That's a plate, B plate for cutting onto, then the card and the die, and the C plate. I'm going to miss my Cuttlebug as it's about to die. I've got a big crack going along the side and I think Father Christmas is going to have to bring me a new one. Here I'm just easing the circle out of the card and taking off the washi, and I'll be able to use that circle again. Can you see how it's got the lovely stitching still around the edge there? So both the negative and the positive come out with stitching around the edges. Flipping the card panel over, I'm going to add glue runner all the way around the edge of the circle, which will give something for the cardstock strips to adhere to. When I did this card originally, I added the strips around the edges of the circle really quickly. I was actually doing it almost as a test run to see if it would work, and then I was thinking I'd go back and do it with a little bit more care. I'm sure there is a way of actually doing this more precisely, where you perhaps mark with a pencil around the edges of the circle where you'd like the cardstock strips to touch the edges of the circle, but I did it just randomly and I actually liked the results, so I'm going to do the same again here. I'm adding the cardstock strip so that it skims a little of the opening of the die cut circle, and then I'm going to add more glue to the new piece of cardstock on the back so that the next piece has something to attach to, and I'm going to repeat that as I go around the circle, switching out the colours, and eventually you go around once and then you start again and you go around again, and that gives this effect. I like to think of it similar to a camera shutter, the way that the elements of the shutter, they close down on each other, sort of concertinaing in on one another, and I think this cardstock strip around the outside edge of a circle gives a similar look, or it could be described as an iris as well. Since making this card, I've actually done some searching on the internet for iris folding, and there's all sorts of wonderful examples out there, and often it involves actually folding the cardstock pieces and using the folded edge on your project. But for cardstock, I would imagine this would be a little bit thick. If you had pattern papers which were thinner and you wanted to fold them, that might give a nice neat edge to the fold, but for cardstock I think that would make it too bulky behind the opening. The cardstock strips are approximately 1/2 inch wide, and as I'm laying down each colour, I'm overlapping with the colour before and then skimming the edge of the opening. However, when I got to the side edges, I realised that my 1/2 inch strip was going to be too wide and that I needed to trim it slightly. As each strip is put into place, I turn the panel over and trim any excess to keep the bulk on the back of the card to a minimum, and then again add more glue runner before moving on to the next one. I'm going to speed everything up now as I move around the circle, adding the cardstock pieces, trimming, adding more glue, and then the next piece. I'm hoping that you can't hear my children in the background here because we're actually on a few days break from school until the end of the week, and so if you hear the grunt of a teenager or the squeal of a little 10-year-old boy running past, my apologies. And while I'm apologising, I would do so also for the fact that I didn't put a plaster on my thumb earlier. I realised last night I got a nasty little catch to the quick of the thumbnail, and I forgot to put the plaster on when I started this video. However, with the children at home and just trying to get this video up and running, I thought rather than start from scratch, I'd just carry on. As we complete the first circuit of cardstock strips and move on to the second round, I'll play a little music and I'll be back shortly. Having attached the final piece, I added some foam adhesive to the rest of the card. The cardstock strips raise the back of the card off sufficiently, but all that's needed is a couple of pieces of foam adhesive on the bits which aren't supported, and then that lays nicely flat on your work surface. Moving on to the rest of the card, I'm going to treat the vellum with a little of the EK Success powder tool, and that will stop the embossing powder that I'm going to use sticking where I don't want it. I've got the Sparkle and Shine stamp set from the December 2014 kit, and I've mounted the Sparkle and Shine sentiment onto the viscous stamp press, and then using the Distress Embossing ink pad, it's a very cute handy little size, using that to ink up the stamp and then press down carefully onto the vellum. As the paper vellum is very flexible, once I'd stamped the sentiment, I then attached the vellum to a scrap piece of card with some washi tape, and that would then support the vellum while I sprinkled it with some of the liquid platinum embossing powder. Even despite having treated the vellum with the EK Success powder tool before using the embossing powder, I did find that I did have a little bit of the granules where I didn't want them, and a dry paintbrush swept those away. I let the heat tool run for a few seconds before turning it to my project so that it was nice and hot, and then the embossing powder melts quickly and you get minimal warping of your cardstock or vellum. I never tire of seeing the embossing powders melt or how beautiful it looks on vellum. I've removed the backers from the foam adhesive and then lined the vellum up on my grid mat so that the sentiment is straight before placing the panel over the top. The card is starting to come together now. The front of the panel is all clean and simple, nice and crisp, and all the messy workings are hidden away on the back. I'm adding more of the glue runner to the back of the vellum so that it will attach to the card base. I'm using the grid on my mat to help keep everything straight as I lay the panel onto the card base. I like to keep the fold of the card base in my left hand and then gently lay the panel down, making sure that all the edges are equal. The final touch is to add some of the gorgeous sequins from the kit, and I'm using Tombow Mono Multi adhesive to keep them adhered, and I'm tucking a couple of them into the cardstock colours as well. And that completes the card, and here's the two side by side, the original and the new one today. I like both cards, but I think I prefer the card base on the original, the silver grey basil card base. However, I also prefer the stitch detail around the circle on today's card. I will list all the supplies used both below the YouTube video and also on my blog. The December 2014 kit from Stamp can be bought as a kit, but also the individual products within it can be bought separately. And finally, if you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up, and I want to thank you for joining me today.